I'm not here to talk about Windows. Yay! I'm here to talk about something entirely different. So we're just going to wait for the computer to get switched, and I'm going to tap dance. As Matthew said, I kind of have a bit of a background working in digital for the last 10 years or so. I've worked at small agencies, I've worked at big agencies. So we're going to try to bring that experience a little bit into here and talk about the modern creative director, which is kind of weird. I freelance quite a bit on the side, and it's actually something I've done the last 2 freelance projects. And that is a really weird kind of situation for me, coming from a technologist background. So we're going to go through and just talk about the things that I would imagine a modern creative director would have. So how many people here are creative directors or take on that role at any given time? A couple, right? So I'm not going to offend you too much. How many people here are creative technologists? Oh yeah, you're not going to want to buy me a beer later. I think we're almost set up.
Almost there.
I can break dance if anyone wants to see that. I do a really mean worm. It's usually after a couple beers. It's a little too early beer for me, but oh, McKinney, I have an idea for your installation. Where's McKinney? Where are you guys? Beer Cade guys. Dudes, go to SparkFun, buy the alcohol sensors, and then add level ups or power moves every time someone blows higher than a certain amount. Drink responsibly, fuck it, right? Your client might not like it, but we'll see. Thank you. All right. So you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Medium. It's one of those things, do at your own risk. A lot of people know me from writing what some people have called a manifesto for women in tech. I wouldn't necessarily call it that, but has anyone here seen this site or read this site? Yeah, there's a couple people. So you can go to Future Woman in Tech if you want to read it. It's a letter I wrote to my niece when she was turned 8, which was in February, and it just talks about being a woman in tech. I'm going to leave that. That's all I have to say about that, which is the perfect segue into the modern creative director. So one other polling thing. How many people here like GIFs? Yeah, okay. So you're going to like my prezzo. That's kind of how I roll. So traditional agency, right? I come from a digital background, digital agencies mostly. I've worked with traditional agencies a lot, usually as a freelancer, usually charging them high, extortionate amounts of money to do things in a very short time. And when I think about traditional agencies, I think about, things like Saatchi and Saatchi, JWT. I think about all these names, all these acronyms, BBDO, and I start to think like, okay, are you a traditional ad agency or are you a law firm? Because just based on the naming, you wouldn't know. You'd be confused by those two. And so when I think of a traditional agency, I often start to think of, suits, like a lot of suits. And I start to think of the sweet, sweet smell of rich mahogany, right? And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you get suits and mahogany, right? And always, always, always brown liquor, bourbon, scotch, whiskey, doesn't matter. It's somewhere. And if it's not on the desk, it's hidden in a filing cabinet. My little tip to you. And I kind of blame this show for a lot of that. But, when we come down to traditional agencies, the core pair has always historically been copywriter and art director or artist. And that could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But, you've really taken the art of writing the slogan, writing the campaign, and then the person who can put the visuals against it. And this is the power pair for, historically for a lot of traditional agencies. And in that sense, it's really easy for someone like a copywriter to move up the ranks and become a creative director. And so when you start to think about those things, those dynamics change when you get into a digital agency. And digital agencies, we're not new, but we're also not old. We're pretty youthful. We're pretty young still. And digital agencies are really interesting because you have the lawyer feel of traditional, monolithic ad agencies, stodgy maybe, historically, not so much anymore. And then you come to digital agencies, and digital agencies are almost like someone gave a whole case of Fun Dip to like a grown man and let him unleash his inner child, right? Because some of the names that you get from digital agencies, you get My Old Place, Big Spaceship. Like, how did they come up with that name? Fantasy Interactive. There's like Stink Media. Like, hi, can I go work with Stink Media? Like, how do you convince your clients, those kind of things? Huge, Firstborn, all these things. These kind of like inherently creative, if you want to call it that, names. And so it's kind of, one of those big polar opposites. And so with digital agencies, you get, more of a youthful, excited, oh my God, we can do this. I call it ADD syndrome a little bit in a digital agency. Like, here's the newest thing, here's the newest thing, here's the newest thing, because so much is changing. And, that they bring a bit of youthfulness to it. And at the same time, when digital agencies came about, traditional agencies used them as an extension, right, of their business. Oh, we need to go digital. We don't know how to do it. Let's get a digital company, a digital, interactive agency, and let's get them to execute. They're going to execute. For a long time, digital agencies, all they did was execute, right? And then at some point, it was just like digital agencies almost kind of had enough. They were like, no, like, we don't need to be, a traditional agency's bitch, for, lack of a better word. We can go and do our own thing. And we know the basics, or what digital agencies assume are the basics of traditional advertising, which often get lost, to be honest. And, we're just going to figure out how to do this on our own. And so while traditional agencies were starting to lose digital agencies, they started to bring stuff in-house, right? You always hear a traditional agency say, oh, we can do everything in-house. Like, we don't need to go out. And all of a sudden, digital agencies were kind of, deciding that they were going to, take this and stick it to the man a little, right? And they're like, we can do this. We can maintain our own clients. We can have those relationships. We can manage them. And so they started bulking out the system. So instead of just having like your designers here and your developers here and then the person who ran it, you started to get copywriters in-house. You started to get strategists. Don't call them planners in a digital agency. They're called strategists. And you're starting to bulk out, even account people. You're starting to get an account layer. And then boom, around 2006, 2007, all these digital agencies are now having the agency of record. Maybe it's just digital agency of record, but they're starting to take this big chunk of business away from traditional agencies. And so, all of a sudden you kind of got these two worlds that are going on, and it's, moving forward, maybe should be leaning from the past and understanding the past, and some people kind of stuck here, how do we move forward? And, the other thing about digital agencies is that people, when they think about what digital does, often when you say digital, people immediately think web. It's a lot more than that, but people think web. And so with digital agencies, people see them as being, kind of nimble and quick and agile, right? Agile is a big word right now. Guarantee you can look up almost every digital agency and 75% will have the word agile or iterative, in a description on their site somewhere. And the reason behind that is, it's very easy to just go and push and publish and have something on the web and fix it and do all those things, right? You don't have that whole traditional agency traditional advertising where you have one shot and you're planning for it. You're planning for it all year. And you're figuring out what it is and you can't screw up. For digital, a lot of things that you screw up, you can fix quite quickly. At least, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Now you're starting to see technologies kind of come up a little bit, right? And you're getting things like, omni-channel campaigns where there's tablets in a store and it's connecting to your Foursquare and you're on your mobile, but you also got an installation and it prints out a receipt that gives you a coupon or whatever, that entire scenario be. And once again, those worlds are starting to really, really merge again. So when you look at, I love this picture, by the way. This is what the designer and developer looks like when you do a Google search, right? Here's my little tidbit. If someone says a term and you're kind of like, it's a little douchebaggy, or I don't really know what that term means, Google image it. It will truly tell you if that term is worth repeating, ever using again, right? So if we look at the designer here, okay, designers no longer wear hormone glasses and turtlenecks, okay? They now wear a scarf and a hat. That's no way a developer. I've never seen a developer wear a tie to work, ever. And they're looking over, the Mac, discussing, touching the screen, which we all know you never do, right? Like, someone here got slapped after this. So this is the idea of what the internet tells me the designer and developer pair are. But the reality about designer and developers right now, especially in a digital agency, is they often sit together, they're often paired up, and they're often the power couple of the company, right? They are the people who can make, and they're self-sufficient. They can take an idea from having lunch, going to beers, whatever it may be, and they can go and execute that. And that is unique within that environment. They can do A to Z. Now, it's not going to mean they're going to have a great product. It's not going to mean it's the best idea. It's not going to mean that it has all the strategy. But there's a lot of power in that. And you're starting to see that power being transferred over to startups as well. Startups are now saying, hey, you know what? It's not just about development. It's not just about an MVP. It's also about making it look good and making it work well. And that's something that, a developer doesn't always, even though they appreciate design, they don't necessarily excel at it, right? If you look at agency life in general, so we've seen, my vision of traditional agency, walking in, cigars, scotch, suits. We all know that's just complete bullshit, but whatever. And you look at, a digital agency, and they're nimble, and they're young, and they're, all sprightly. I've always wanted to say that word, sprightly. You start to look at it, and according to Google searches, everyone has a slide in their office, right? Seriously, who's going to go on a slide at the office? Like, hey, just let me slide down and, like a very dry slip and slide. I don't think so, right? But, this is a whole idea about this is that, we're hip and vibrant, right? That traditional agencies aren't stodgy, that they're with it, they get it. And for the most part, most of them really do. And that digital agencies also, are hip and vibrant and are kind of, gaining their own ground. And so, this is, the picture I found for this, which I thought was really funny, because I don't know who works like this. And why is Alanis Morissette on the slide? So in your environment, the idea of having creative environments is a big thing right now for both traditional and digital. And that brings us kind of to, how do we define a creative director now? And this whole talk kind of came as a result, I think it was a week ago. Was anyone at Adweek? Did any of the Adweek stuff? I'd assume I'd see some hands. Yeah. So I was seeing this presentation at Adweek, and I'm going to leave out details. A beer later will get you details. And I was listening to someone talk about the modern creative director and how their agency could do everything in-house and all these things. And I was starting to feel like, wow, there's a whole bunch of things that are, really out of touch. And so when we think about how we define a modern creative director, is it the creative genius, the person who takes the idea or has the idea and they just keep leveling it up? They just keep making it better. That person who you give them an idea and you know it's going to be golden, is it that person? Or is it the person who's like a vision defender, who says, okay, here's where we're going, and here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to do everything to keep it, in grounds of that. I'm going to make sure that all the decisions we make, adhere to the vision. So for me, when I think about working with a modern creative director, and I say modern because I think the definition of what we think a creative director is really does need to change. I think that times have changed, things are progressing, and this definition as well needs to change. And so When I think about a modern creative director, I think about someone, this makes me want to buy a pug. I think about someone who's multilingual. And when I say multilingual, I don't mean, French, English, Spanish. I mean someone who can talk the languages that inherently take place in the work environment. And so I mean someone who can speak business. A creative director is someone I want to, knows the client's business. They can speak to the client about it. They can challenge the client about it. They, their decisions are guided, in keeping tune with some of the business stuff. And they can speak strategy, right? They need to be able to talk about things like metrics or KPIs or outcomes, planning, all those things. They need to be able to speak a little bit of strategy as well because, inherently you want someone who's strategic. And they can speak design, right? So often right now what you're seeing, especially in digital agencies, is that you're seeing creative directors is a designer who has made their way up through the ranks, right? And sometimes it's a copywriter still, but most often it's a designer. And that's great. I mean, that's awesome. But I also think that, there is room for other people to be moving up the ranks a little bit in terms of creative direction. And I think the ability to speak design, not necessarily be the person who can just take over everything and do it yourself, is just as important. The thing when it comes to design is if you can communicate what the issue is or what changes that you want and you're very clear about it, if you can speak that language, if you can speak typography and layout, if you can speak all those kind of things, usability, everything else, then you could be, to me, a modern creative director. I wouldn't think twice about taking design direction from someone who can communicate. Because usually what happens is that the person who can't communicate, they're seen as someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. They might have the vision in their head, but if you can't communicate it, it doesn't make any value. I look at someone who can speak process. To me, it's really important that a person for a modern creative director knows what goes into something. They don't have to know the ins and outs. They don't have to know the absolute details, but they have to understand the process of where they're starting and where they're going to end up and what happens in between. Some people say that knowing a little bit too much about these things kind of hinders, but I think it just adds value. They need to be able to speak technology. Is it weird that this GIF looks like me a little bit? Because that's how I work. Blue screen of death. But, they have to speak technology. And once again, I'm not saying that you need to understand everything. You don't need to know all the languages. You don't need to know, what choices you're necessarily going to make. But you need to be able to speak intelligently a little bit about technology. You need to be able to say why a mobile app might be better than, or a native app might be better than a mobile website. You need to, understand these things and speak about them. You need to speak about them in a way where you don't paint yourself into a corner, where you overpromise, or you say things, inherently because you're going to that realm. And so for me, that's really important, especially as a technologist, because I don't know about you, but I can tell you how many weekends I have worked because someone said something that they shouldn't have, and instead of just saying, I don't know, they just said something and overpromised. And it's, for a lot of times, that ends up on the developer. So, I want someone who's multilingual. I want someone who's a maker and a consumer. Whoever invented this is genius. That's like 10 hot dogs right in a coffee pot, right? And so I want someone who's a maker and a consumer. And what I mean by that is that I want someone who is making stuff. I don't care what making stuff to you means. Are you knitting stuff and crocheting stuff? Cool. Are you, all over Instagram doing an art exhibit? Cool. Are you playing with microprocessors or Connect or whatever? Cool. It doesn't matter. Are you drawing and illustrating? Whatever. I want you making. To me, it's really important that, we instill this value of making. And I want a consumer as well. The important part about a maker and a consumer is that you get into the whole idea of the law of the instrument, right? It's the golden hammer rule. And it's the idea that, it's, the only tool you have is a hammer to treat everything as if it were a nail. And making and consuming helps you get out of that. It helps you open up your realm a little bit, and so that's why it's really valuable to me. Making is super important because passion is infectious. If I see someone who is, making big decisions about where we're going, but I know that they're also making other stuff and they're passionate about what they're doing, it is infectious. It is going to help me also become a maker. It's going to help me also, move into that realm. Making instills apathy, okay? Pardon the language, but best GIF on the web. But it instills apathy, okay? If you're making, you understand the process. You understand, like I screwed up here, I should have done this, all those kind of things. And all of a sudden, apathy is a good thing. It's a good thing to have on a team, and it's a good thing to have for the user, right? And then, consumer. I want someone who's using. I want someone who understands what digital is about. To say that you're embracing, if anyone's company right now says that they're embracing digital, you're already about 10 years behind, right? Digital is just inherent now. It's part of what you do, okay? It might not be part of your output. Your output might be print, it might be magazine, it might be TV. It does not matter. But digital is just inherent. And so the important thing about being a consumer and using and being exposed to all these things is that you know what to say to your audience, and that's, for advertising, that's like, what do you say? But it's also where you say it. Where you say it is super valuable. Are you going to Twitter or are you going to Facebook? Are you going somewhere else? Are you going to go into the store? Are you doing bricks and mortar? What are you doing? It's really important that there's a person who's constantly consuming and they understand these things.